All right, let's get right into it.
So we'd like to play for you now a song called Please Please Me.
Already starting off controversial. Yeah, I love this album. Maybe a little bit too basic in terms of songwriting. The lyrics are a bit repetitive and oversimplified, but you just can't deny the catchiness, the sweet saccharine quality to these that give them endless replay value, nostalgia, really just pure joy and innocence. Well, maybe not that pure and innocent. The vocal harmonies and this doo-wop quality really sells the album for me. Just so heartwarming and genuine. There's this unique longing quality to these songs that keeps bringing me back to the album. I feel like most people see this as sort of just a passable album, but maybe it's just the nostalgia factor or just the replayability that puts this album above a lot of other studio records in their discography. My favorite tracks would probably have to go to Anna, Go to Him, Baby It's You, Do You Want to Know a Secret? Yeah, so super simple, super effective, great harmonica parts throughout this album. Could sing this album really forever in the car. And yeah, for that reason, I would safely put it in the A category.
Yeah, anyway, that's
That's
the answer to the question.
Yeah. It's very nice to be in Ireland, though.
Both bits.
Yeah.
Okay, next is the sophomore album with the Beatles. We have a second helping of these really sweet, sugary, melodic, harmonic ballads once again. But this time I feel like this crop of songs is just a lot more immemorable. Something to know with these early Beatles records is that there's a heavy implementation of covers from older rock and roll songs, rockabilly songs, even early soul classics as well. It feels almost like in those jazz albums where you have an artist that puts their own improvised spin on a jazz standard. But in this case, it's pop music from the 50s and 60s and earlier. So I don't know, just a little bit less consistent than the first album. In terms of a whole album experience, it's just not as cohesive to me as the first record. So really, I just come back to cherry pick a couple songs off this album. I would pick All My Loving, Till There Was You, and really that's about it from this one. Sort of an average listening experience, has a few standout tracks, has a couple okay tracks, but overall I would put it in the C category. Okay, next is A Hard Day's Night. This album to me shows a lot of growth for the Beatles. To me, it has more of a studio album feel rather than a collection of just recorded songs. Funnily enough, I think the first half of this album is near pop perfection. The run that you have from A Hard Day's Night to Can't Buy Me Love is really just phenomenal songwriting. The song If I Fell opens up to this beautifully infatuated love song that has this incredibly mature sense of longing. That's kind of surprising for an early Beatles record. Another standout track would be I'm Happy Just to Dance With You. Melodically, it's just so catchy and it's so simple. Even if that tom drum is a little bit annoying in the verse, if you focus on it in the mix. The song And I Love Her is an obvious standout track on this album. Incredibly beautiful acoustic guitar work, and I'm really glad they went for a more stripped back instrumental on this song, and that little clave is just such a nice subtle touch to the song. So yeah, it has that going for it alongside heart-pouring lyrics that empty out the protagonist's soul to this girl. If you haven't already, I'd recommend checking out Kurt Cobain's cover of this song. I mean, it's really just a night and day difference. His version is so dejected, almost deranged in its delivery that subverts the original character of the song. It's really a genius rendition. If you've never heard it before, I highly recommend you check it out. And yeah, the rest of the album after the halfway point is just kind of okay. Yeah, honestly, very forgettable, middle of the road songs. So for that reason, I would just sort of put it in the middle of the ranking, just sort of a low B.
Here are four of the nicest youngsters we've ever had on our stage. The Beatles, bring them on!
Okay, next is Beatles For Sale. This album is actually nearly unlistenable for me. There's just really no character to any of these songs. The arrangements feel a bit like a carbon copy to the original cover songs that they're covering on this album. The instrumentals and production are just really bland. I feel like they were going for a more roots rock aesthetic on this album, but it just flops for me personally. And to me, that's what made the earlier albums more special than this one, is that even though there were covers on those earlier albums, the song selection felt a bit more thoughtful, where they could be a bit more stylized on the record, and those songs feel like they belonged on that album a little bit more. And usually even with these more middle of the road albums, I can cherry pick certain songs to come back to, but really the only song I would take would be I'll Follow the Sun, maybe. I feel like it has the strongest melodic appeal of any of the songs on this whole album, and it's actually the shortest song on this album too, so take of that what you will. On paper, this album is doing everything the previous releases got right, but the execution just feels a little bit poor, and yeah, for that reason, it has to go in the D.
Dare we ask how you know?
How? How? I saw those footprints on this guidebook which points out places of
Next up we have Help, and for me it's just another sort of just passable Beatles album as a whole. Don't get me wrong though, I think there's some really great highlights on this album, and I believe this is the first Beatles album where we have all original songs and no covers, so that's a big step forward. The titular song Help is obviously a Beatles classic. It's really just a touching song about growing up and feeling a little existential, kind of having like a midlife crisis. So yeah, great driving groove to the song, and on subsequent tracks like The Night Before and Another Girl. And also, despite having distancing ourselves from the super sweet crooning vocal harmonies of the first couple of albums, we still retain some great melodic hooks, like on the song You've Got to Hide Your Love Away and Ticket to Ride. Ticket to Ride might be one of my favorite Beatles songs ever, if I'm being honest. Extremely creative, inventive drum groove that really defines Ringo's style. The song just has really great pacing, it's multifaceted, it's catchy, it's really just an impressive song. I've Just Seen a Face is another highlight just because, I mean, it just has a great, fantastic chorus. And as we near the end of the album, we're presented with the crown jewel of this whole album, and that would be Yesterday. It's heartbreaking, it's dramatic. In my opinion, it's the most beautiful song that we've heard so far in the discography, and it's easily the best use of an incredible string section that really only bolsters the beautiful story at the song's core. So yeah, that's really the weakest point of this album, is its consistency, but overall I do come back to many of the tracks on this album. So I would put this album at B, and I would put it slightly below A Hard Day's Night.
What was it that first attracted you to me? Well, you're very polite, aren't you?
Next would be Rubber Soul, and we're starting to get into the really heavy hitters in the discography. Obviously super iconic songs coming up, and from what I've seen in some internet circles among diehard Beatles fans, Rubber Soul is a real fan favorite, and it's not hard to see why. There's some incredible highs on this album, namely the first track, Drive My Car. For me, Nowhere Man is great too. The tracks Michelle and Girl have always been akin to one another in my mind. So yeah, great melodic songs, great stories, and I love the tiny detail where you can hear all of them sort of suck up the spit on the mic on the song Girl. In My Life is a uniquely moving and subtle song. I love the bright and almost Mozart-inspired piano solo that occurs in the middle of the song, and I think Ringo's genius is on full display here with this song. He's really doing so much with so little, giving the track a forward momentum without flooding it or overdoing it. Yeah, so similar to Help, I think there's some great highlights here, but there's just too many okay tracks that stop it from being an amazing album. So for those reasons, I would put it in the B row. I would put it slightly above these two records.
Look at all those strange looking people out there. Let's ask them the way out. I say, can you tell us the way out?
The next album we have is Revolver, and this is usually where you see a little bit of controversy and people picking and choosing sides. It really comes down to your own personal taste. We're about halfway through this list, and we have a huge stylistic shift in the overall sound, the genre, the styles that are being presented on this album here. And it makes sense why this album is so highly regarded as being a boundary pusher, not just for the Beatles, but for all of popular music as a whole at the time, if you think about it. We have so many lush and interesting Indian influences that flood this album and contribute to its psychedelic feel without really sacrificing songwriting. In fact, the songwriting, I would argue, gets even better. We have more creative Beatles world building, in my opinion. Sonically, there's the obvious introduction of sitars, we have drone notes, horns, special effects, more ambience on this album, but it doesn't ever feel tacky. They all serve a purpose in enhancing the whole listening experience. I really just have a couple personal gripes with this record that I have a feeling a couple people might disagree with me heavily. And the first would have to be Eleanor Rigby, which I can respect for its writing, its string arrangements, its sophisticated, highbrow sort of sheen. But for me, this song is just too scant at its core. And the second major gripe I have would have to be Yellow Submarine, which again I can respect for its whimsical story, the sound effects, effects, the atmosphere, especially for a song that's spearheaded by Ringo. But to me, this is just one of my least favorite Beatles songs, period. Everything from the vocal delivery and the chorus just feels so flat and just plain annoying. But other than that, there isn't really much else that's negative that I have to say about this album. I have to mention Here, There, Everywhere. That will probably go down in history as one of the most beautiful love songs ever written, and that's saying a lot for the Beatles. The song For No One is a tragic tale of a love that has long faded away. And nearing the end of this album, the song Got to Get You Into My Life feels like an incredible victory lap. I just love the bright horn sections on this song. And we finished very strong with the closer, Tomorrow Never Knows. It has such an amazing drum groove, any of these really psychedelic reverse tape sections as well. And you can really tell how their collaboration with Ravi Shankar and the substances they may have taken really shook them to their core in terms of their musical diet and appreciation. So yeah, this is easily their most ambitious effort up until this point we've seen so far, and it really does pay off in spades. So yeah, for me it would have to go right in the A row. It's borderline S. If it wasn't for a couple gripes and a couple songs, I can see how you'd put it in S, and I would not argue against you if you have it in S. Yeah, that one's probably not going to go over so well. Okay, next is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Another record where, depending on which type of Beatles fan you ask, it's either scoring really, really high or it's just kind of a middle-of-the-road album. It's high concept, it's highbrow. I wouldn't say it's too pretentious. It never takes itself really too seriously. It has some level of self-awareness to it. And you have a band that makes the concept of their album to be another fictional band, and we're still holding on to these whimsical elements of harp, sitar drones, harpsichord, pitched hand drums, and lofty string sections as well. Great iconic songs on this album, obviously, with a little help from my friends Lucy in the Sky of Diamonds, A Day in the Life. And as much as I appreciate the production tricks, the hard cuts, the time signature changes, the lore dropping songwriting, they sometimes just feel like they stop right there at the surface, being just sort of these effects or tricks. The core tunes on this album for me just aren't as strong as consistently as they are on some other albums that might be coming up, and it feels like these aesthetic tricks are just masking the deeper underlying issue, which is the weaker songwriting on this album. But again, that's also kind of the charm of this album, is how over the top the performances are, how sort of big production Broadway style this is. So yes, being extremely nitpicky and critical of what is obviously a great creative world expanding album, and I just feel the need to point out some flaw of what has essentially become an untouchable classic among critics and fans alike. Oh yeah, and how could I forget Good Morning, Good Morning, an extremely annoying and almost unlistenable song. So yeah, I would put it in the A, a strong album, a respectable album, just not a personal favorite of mine, and that's gonna be another tough one to get across. Magical Mystery Tour. Dare I say the better concept album to the precursor Sgt. Pepper's. It might be a stretch, but Magical Mystery Tour is genuinely just hit after hit, banger after banger. The songwriting, the world building, the lore dropping is just so dialed in. It's so sure of its identity while still giving itself enough wiggle room to play with its own concept. The songs are incredibly catchy and iconic. Even the deeper cuts like The Fool on the Hill, Your Mother Should Know have incredible grooves and progression in the way that they unfold this corner of this fictitious tour that we embark on. And I just love the absurdist lyrics on I Am the Walrus. And if you've ever played the Beatles Rock Band, those visuals that play in the background on Xbox freaked me out as a kid. We have inventive Mellotron usage on Strawberry Fields Forever, obviously. And to close the record on All You Need Is Love, we have a beautiful way of closing up the album that makes a subtle callback to one of their first singles ever, She Loves You. And you can hear this melody sung on the song as it fades out, so I just thought that was a cool touch. And really the only directionless, weaker concept songs for me on this album would have to go to Blue Jay Way and Baby You're a Rich Man. But other than that, we just have a very impressive, solid, highly overlooked Beatles great. So yeah, it would go in the A, and I'll put it below Sgt. Pepper's. Here we go, we're here, we're entering GOAT status, GOAT territory is here. The Beatles' White Album. To me, this album is really what summarizes what makes the Beatles great. We have unending lore, we have risk-taking, we have mastery and commands of each respective member's instrument, amazing studio performances, creative sound designs, left turns, intensely honest songwriting, and what I love is that they just don't care what the limit is on songwriting. There is no limit on the topics. Anything and everything is a source of inspiration. We have a double album here, an hour and a half of material, and it's sprawling, it's diverse, it's giving a mixtape feel that predates the mixtape, and it's just so rare that you come across an album that's this long and yet it's this varied, and it's still consistent from front to back. You have more straightforward rock cuts, you have alternative cuts, heavy metal cuts, you have ambient sound collage cuts, you have orchestral cuts. It really just goes on, and you're pretty much guaranteed to like something on this album, if not all of it. I love how the Beatles get really self-referential on songs like Glass Onion, and you have extremely silly songs like Wild Honey Pie and Piggies and Why Don't We Do It in the Road. Everybody's got something to hide except for me and my monkey. And there's simultaneously songs on this album that are just heart-wrenchingly beautiful, like Blackbird, I Will, Mother Nature's Son. This album feels like the creative refinement that the band has been sharpening up until this point, and now that it's later on into their career, they've really mastered the practice of workshopping strange song concepts and ideas and polishing them. And for me personally, this is the album with the most replay value in their whole discography. I just never really get tired of listening to this album, and you can be in any mood to listen to it as well. And there's just more and more layers to peel back with every listen. I just can't really recommend this album enough, and I don't really have anything bad to say about it. And while I'm on this Glaze train, I guess I might as well say I'm not sure if we'll ever see anything like this from the music industry at large moving forward into the future, because we just drift farther and farther away from album culture every day, and we embrace singles culture a lot more, especially with streaming services and algorithms. So yeah, this is definitely a creative high point, a peak in their discography for me, and for most as well. I don't really have anything else left to say. I think I just have to put it in the S.
We meanies only take no for an answer.
The next one is Yellow Submarine. I have a tough time getting through this record. To me, it really does feel more like a soundtrack than an album. The songs just don't pop, and they're just not as present. They don't really feel as fully fleshed out with their own identity as the other studio albums feel. A lot of these songs to me just feel like they're ideas that were never fully orchestrated and were just put on this album just to fill up space. You have two of these tracks that are already on other Beatles albums, and half of it is just a George Martin showcase anyway. They're just kind of uninteresting, underwhelming. Only thing I'll admit is that the closing track, Yellow Submarine and Pepperland, does have a unique charm about it that I do like more than the original track at this point. And the only track that I really come back to on this album is Hey Bulldog, so it has to go in the D row. I think it's their worst album.
You take issue with the fact that it wasn't a lullaby that comes next.
No, I didn't. I took issue with it. No, I did
You
not.
said that a lullaby.
And bouncing back from their worst album, we're finally here. We're nearing the end of the studio album career for the Beatles, and they managed to make what is considered, in my eyes, and in eyes of many Beatles fans and music fans, to be their greatest work. This album has reached a level of icon and legend status that has infiltrated popular culture at large, and it makes a lot of sense why. Everything from the album cover to every micro nuance in rhythm, in chord choices, and solos is just genius on display. There's really not a single skip on this entire album. Even the 25-second Her Majesty at the very end is an intriguing think piece to end the record on, and I love how the album ends on a note that it's really not all that serious and they're just having fun here. And if I remember correctly, this album, alongside maybe Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, I think this is the first album that I've ever listened to from start to finish, and this was back in elementary school, and I'm really glad that by this serendipity of the moment and on my iPad, the first album I ever listened to all the way through happens to be arguably one of the greatest of all time. Set a high standard for all other music after that point, but it definitely shapes my appreciation for how an album is sequenced and packaged for delivery for an audience to listen to. It blew my mind when I first listened to it, just to think that you could carry a narrative or a story that flows between one track to the next. And you know, what could have been just one long song to finish the album with multiple acts, was intentionally split up into multiple songs that are just put in a specific order. And this album for me was the inception point that made me fall in love with listening to albums all the way through, because this signaled to me that the Beatles cared enough about how they want their audience to perceive their music. Just like how a seasoned painter uses perspective and color to guide the artist's eye in their painting, the mix and mastering on this album is a masterclass. The songwriting and world building once again on this album is at a rich, vibrant, effective high point. And despite the production being so variable and ever-changing, everything is just mixed to perfection. The bass lines, the piano accompaniment are just so clear. The weird synth-like textures are highlighted to an extent, but they never drown out the rest of the mix. And that really is what this album is great at doing. It gives you enough catchy ear candy that supplements the strength and the core of the songwriting and structure. And this album appeals to a common mainstream audience as well. But if you decide to pay attention to the minute micro details in the production, there's also something for you to marvel at as well. Yeah, as you can tell, I'm absolutely enamored with this record. I have been the moment I first heard it over a decade ago, and I think I'm just gonna continue praising this album. And yeah, this album is near perfect, if not perfect. Again, just not a blemish or a lull on this entire album, and very sensibly it's in a lot of discussions for being one of the, if not the greatest album ever recorded. And if you in the big 2025 have somehow never heard this album in its entirety before, I'm not really sure how else to convince you. So yeah, obviously it has to go in the S.
Well, what do you think?
I think I burnt my finger.
Okay, we have the last studio album here, and to end things off, we have Let It Be. And the conclusion to this long, arduous journey, it's a good one. It's very good. You have a bluesier, more stripped back, roots rock sort of live feel to this album. To me, this is everything that Beatles For Sale is missing and everything that that record is trying to be. But that being said, I think the stronger moments on this album are actually not these songs, but the more existential, beautiful songs. You have Across the Universe, which is an otherworldly vibe that feels just so out of place on this album, to be honest, in the best way possible. And I've never been able to put my finger on why this song feels and sounds so alien and supernatural, yet so grounded and human at the same time. You have Let It Be, the title track, which is an obvious highlight for its beauty. Then we have songs like The Long and Winding Road, an incredibly bittersweet and fitting track for the Beatles' final album. It's swirling, it's momentous, it's a swelling song that feels like a beautiful send-off. So yeah, some incredible highlights on this track list, but overall I feel like a lot of the cuts are kind of just like interludes, more jam session like cuts that really don't stick very well in my memory. So yeah, solid record. I would put it safely in the B above Rubber Soul. And yeah, that's my final ranking. Let me know how you would fare with these albums yourself. There's so much variety obviously in this discography, and it's easy to see how your list might look wildly different from mine. And I feel like most fans would rate Revolver and Rubber Soul a bit higher than I do, and they would probably downgrade Please Please Me and Magical Mystery Tour way lower than where I put them. I wanted to keep this video strictly about the quality of the music itself rather than it being a lofty think piece discussion about the influence and legacy of the band. But let me just say this one thing for those that say that the Beatles are overrated. I think it's one thing if it's your preference and the Beatles just aren't your thing, I get that. But you have to at least acknowledge and respect the cultural splash that they made and the level of trailblazing that they did for popular music at large. And I guarantee you the same people that call the Beatles overrated have probably never listened to their discography as a whole. Either that or they're missing the cultural context of their success. And keep in mind that this music is from the 1960s. They expanded what could have just stayed at surface level crooner pop, and they could have been wildly successful at that. But no, they decided to venture into uncharted territory. They made strides in bringing world music and more Eastern influences into their work, and they really just set the foundation for what art pop and Baroque sophisti-pop would sound like to come. They shaped modern-day indie alternative rock styles speculatively. They implemented high-concept fictional storytelling. They even dipped their toes into more ambient, avant-garde, experimental work as well. And with songs like Helter Skelter, I guess you could argue that they predicted or started hard rock, maybe even heavy metal music. And maybe it's because I have a soft spot for the Beatles, for being the first band I was truly obsessed with. But I dare you to listen to Love Me Do and Revolution 9 back to back and tell me that's not from the same band. Even through 13 studio albums that I reviewed today, they were all released within a 7-year period. You could look at a painting by Jackson Pollock, for example, and say to yourself, well, hand me a blank canvas and a bucket of paint and I'll give you a $200 million painting myself. But that's exactly the issue, is that you were not there in the 1940s and 1950s where this drip technique of paint splatter on the canvas broke onto the scene and completely shattered and shook all conventional techniques of style, which would found the abstract expressionist movement to come. Pollock was the person that splattered the paint onto the canvas first, and he did it with enough conviction to publish. So even if you were alive at the time, and even if you were an artist, you would probably have some level of inhibition that would prevent you from boiling down a form into something purely chaotic and purely abstract. And so if you compare a top Beatles hit with a top 100 streaming hit today, I can understand why you might feel a little bit underwhelmed. And that's not to say that you can't make that comparison or that your preference for more complicated music is invalid. But even with that being said, if you just listen and really pay attention to songs like Martha, My Dear, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, Revolution 1, Happiness is a Warm Gun, Tomorrow Never Knows, You Never Give Me Your Money, just as a couple examples, and you just try to follow along to the moving chord progression, the performances, the changing time signatures, you'll soon realize that these songs are a bit more complicated than you think. But the Beatles are experts at transforming these complicated theoretical practices and turning them into more digestible, catchy, listenable pop songs. Right, like you would never see Jacob Collier write a She Loves You. He never could because it's not microtonal and it's not in 36/74 time signature. But anyway, just a long-winded yap session that I thought would be appropriate to defend the Beatles for, this comment that they're overrated. But yeah, if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching, and let me know if there's another artist discography that you want me to cover next. And please subscribe so that Frank Ocean will come back from the dead. Please.